Next from Springfield, public speaker Joe Alexander discusses the history of Farm Aid 30 years after its founding in Illinois. This runs about 20 minutes.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here in Springfield, the capital city. I have a couple guests I'd just like to introduce that maybe you don't normally see here at Springfield Kiwanis. Yes, we're on TV today. We have Terry Martin of Illinois Channel. He's the executive director. Illinois Channel, if you will, is the Illinois C-SPAN. Covers public policy, and Terry and I have known each other for a number of years, and I'm like, hey Terry, I'm in Springfield. Do you want to catch up with me on a speech? And so here he is. So thank you, Terry, for coming out. Another guest that I have is Mike Clem of Capital City Speakers Bureau. Mike, thank you for coming. Mike and I have talked on and off the last several months about possibly working together. He's president of a Speakers Bureau. So Mike, thank you for coming out. I know your time's of a premium, so I thank you for being with us. Now, I've got another guest I'd like to introduce, Esther Size. Esther is with the Don Craven Law Firm here in Springfield. I understand that she beat another attorney in a court case recently, or maybe a couple years ago.
A couple years ago, but she was good.
But we need, don't we? And so attorneys can keep us out of trouble. In fact, I checked with Esther before I spoke here today, and I'm going to be talking about the first Farm Aid, which was 30 years ago. And I may tell you a couple stories which you may find humorous. And Esther was very pleased to tell me that we are beyond the statute of limitations for any stories that might offend anybody. So, so thank you, Esther, for being with us today. So as the bio mentioned, I kind of have an athletic background. I have a historical interest. That's kind of what I studied over at the U of I. Contrary to rumor, anything that you might have heard, I did not play basketball or football for the Fighting Illini. I know that will shock you after looking at me. But I do hope this luncheon program's kind of fun and light, and hopefully have some fun as I share with you, talking about the very first Farm Aid, which was September 22nd, 1985. In Champaign, Illinois, at the University of Illinois Memorial Stadium. And, you know, a lot of history has happened here in Springfield, but the origins and how Farm Aid started right here in Springfield at the 1985 Illinois State Fair. Now, before I start talking about Farm Aid, I have to kind of set the stage, if you will, okay? So this is the 1980s. Ronald Reagan, an Illinoisan, was President of the United States. 1985 in that decade. We were suffering economically, at least in agriculture, still from some high interest rates. There was land value crashes, which prompted some troubling economic times in agriculture and the farming industry. And then the drought would not come later, but there were some price challenges that a lot of American farmers faced. And lest we forget, the Illinois governor was a guy by the name of Big Jim Thompson, Governor Jim Thompson. Lest we forget him, but Governor Thompson, you know, all 6'6", 6'7" of him, must be nice. But he was the longest serving chief executive of the state of Illinois. And so, if you're a sports fan here in the room, the St. Louis Cardinals would be in the World Series that year. Any Cardinal fans? Okay, we got a Cub fan. We got a Cardinal fan with our waitress. That's great. Ozzie Smith would hit a really big home run. Willie McGee was the National League most valuable player, and Vince Coleman was the Rookie of the Year. The Super Bowl Shuffle hadn't even been thought of. The 1985 Bears, that's another anniversary that we're coming up on the 30th anniversary of the Bears playing in the 1986 Super Bowl. But that was kind of the context from which we were doing. You know, a lot of women were getting perms. Some guys got perms. I don't know if any of you were among them, but that was just kind of the styles back then. And so like the sun coming up in the morning, you just knew that Willie Nelson, Alabama, and the Beach Boys were going to play at the Illinois State Fair every single year. Do you remember that? They just played for years and years and years. They would come back to Springfield. There was a close relationship with, I think, the Thompson administration, people that ran the Illinois State Fair and the Illinois Department of Ag. And you just knew those guys were coming back. Well, Governor Thompson really loved the Illinois State Fair. And after Willie Nelson had performed that year at the 1985 fair, the governor walked backstage and said, you know, Willie, thanks for coming. It's great to see you again. We appreciate you coming. And Willie Nelson says to Governor Thompson, you know, Governor, we just need to do something for the farmers. The governor's kind of like, well, what are you talking about? Well, this was just after Live Aid, We Are the World, We Are the People. If you remember that, that was another group of musicians that had come together to kind of do this event. And his point was that there was, again, challenges in agriculture and that we needed to do some things to kind of talk about challenges facing American farming and in that sector. And so they kind of departed ways, and Willie gets on a bus and his band, and they go to Iowa, to Des Moines, to the Iowa State Fair. And one of a friend of mine that I've recently connected with is a guy by the name of Mike Du Bois. I don't know if any of you would know Mike. Mike's actually a Springfield native. He actually now lives in Nashville. He's been a consultant for about 10 different farm aids, and he actually was the conduit that basically started working on Farm Aid. So he gets a call from the governor's office that next morning. Hey, Mike, from Jimmy Skilbeck, if any of you know Jimmy Skilbeck. And hey, Mike, the governor's really hot on this. We're going to do this big, massive concert at the University of Illinois. Or that'd probably be a good venue to do it. And again, Governor Thompson being a kind of an outgoing, gregarious guy. The governor of Illinois, as you may know, is the ex officio member of the University of Illinois Board of Trustees. I'm sure Governor Thompson pulled out his pocket Illini football schedule. The Illini had just been in the Rose Bowl the year previously for the first time in about 20 years. And I can just hear the conversation now. Hi, Stan Eikenberry, the longest serving president of the University of Illinois. This is Jim. They kind of talk that way. I noticed that you didn't have a home football game weekend, September 22nd. We've got this idea to do this really big concert in Champaign at Memorial Stadium. And so in principle, they kind of talked about it, had the concept down, but don't tell anybody about it, okay? And fortunately, we didn't have emails. Email track to track things like this, it predates emails, but in principle, they waited like 3 or 4 days to tell the story. Please go ahead. They then chose to kind of keep this secret, and as anybody remember this, I do, because I met Governor Thompson when I was about 10 years old. Governor Thompson liked to fly on helicopters, so he gets on his helicopter here at the Capitol, and he flies to do Champaign at the University of Illinois to do a press conference to talk about this concept of Farm Aid and what it was going to be about. Well, in a matter of 6 weeks from a conversation that Willie Nelson and Governor Thompson had at the Illinois State Fair here in Springfield, this epic concert event starts growing. And I'm gonna take my jacket off, and hope this doesn't do anything to our mic here. But this is actually a 30-year-old, don't be jealous, concert T-shirt from the very first Farm Aid. And so this on the back is a number of the acts that played at the concert. Now, I don't know if those in the front can read, who were there, but really the concert lineup got epic in nature. Now, I don't know about you. I grew up rolling around with my dad, listening to country music in a pickup truck. I would have given anything to hear Johnny Cash live in concert. I still even today listen to a bunch of Johnny Cash. Well, Willie starts calling his buddies. So Johnny Cash comes, Chris Christopherson, Alabama, the Beach Boys, some of those type groups, and they say, hey, we're putting this event on. We're going to benefit family farmers. Concert's going to be this date in this venue, and the thing just got rolling. Well, again, for any Illini sports fans, I know there's a number in the room. The 80s belonged to the Illini. We had just again played in the Rose Bowl. People were excited about all things Illini. And the athletic director at the U of I was not for the concert, okay? He was adamantly opposed to the concert because at that time, they had just laid brand new AstroTurf on the field of Memorial Stadium. And, they say, you're going to throw this big concert on top of my brand new AstroTurf? I don't think so. So they had to kind of finesse, and I'm sure the president talked to the athletic director, hey, Stoner, we got to make this work. I mean, this thing's kind of a little bit bigger than the rest of us. Some of the people at the university, and God bless people that work at the university, but the university kind of moves at a snail's pace at times. They started saying things like, we're going to need a lot of liability insurance. So originally for an event like this, you might need like $1 million of liability insurance. And then they said, oh no, you're going to need $15 million in liability. So they had to finesse through things like that. Alcohol. Now, I don't know where everybody's at on that issue, but if you're at an all-day concert, you probably want to drink some of it, right? You can't serve alcohol inside Memorial Stadium other than up in the luxury suites. And so they had to finesse, how do you serve alcohol at a state university facility where alcohol is prohibited. So there was issues like that to work out. They ended up getting plywood from all over the country to put down on the football field to cover up the AstroTurf, so there was going to be no damage to the AstroTurf. A custom-made stage had to be built, and guys were on handmade cranks, so one band would get on, and these guys would literally crank it and move the next band on forward. Okay, and Du Bois tells me more people couldn't get into the concert in terms of performers than wanted to be in the act and be a part of the show. It wasn't just country music that played. I don't know, the late B.B. King was at the first Farm Aid. Any Parrot fans in the room, Jimmy Buffett was supposed to show up in Champaign and play at Farm Aid. He didn't show. I'm not sure exactly what happened with Jimmy Buffett. The last concert I saw just a couple weeks ago at the State Fair, Sammy Hagar, the Red Rocker. I don't know if there's any, Sammy Hagar fans. There was a little band called Van Halen that some of you may have heard of. They had just broken up. They had a pretty good album called 1984. A song called Jump was really popular. Well, I don't know what happened there, but a guy by the name of David Lee Roth got in a fight with the rest of Van Halen, and David Lee Roth wasn't with the band anymore. Well, the very first time Sammy Hagar ever played in public, at least with Eddie Van Halen, it wasn't the full band Van Halen, but the very first time Sammy Hagar played with Eddie, with Valley Bertinelli, who you may remember Eddie and Valley Bertinelli were married at one point in time, was on stage, was in Champaign, Illinois at the very first Farm Aid. And, cable TV was in its infancy back then. So the Nashville Network, which was a brand new station, again, CNN hadn't come along, much less Fox News or any of the other stations that we're used to today. They played and they covered live the very first Farm Aid. And so again, this concert just keeps going. Billy Joel played at the first Farm Aid, pre-Christy Brinkley, I think before they got married. But this just, again, an epic concert, if you will. And I dare say, I know there's some, again, attorneys and people with governmental experience in the room, and I really appreciate that here in our capital city. But just merely for procurement reasons. Procurement meaning kind of the processes that a state university has to go through, which meets state law. I would dare say you couldn't even do this today because of a reason simply for procurement. I know State Farm Center has some challenges booking the latest acts at State Farm Center in Champaign because of procurement reasons. But to make a long story short, the event just kept rolling on. Eventually, they would start selling tickets. So they sold 80,000 tickets in 2 days for $25 a piece, okay? And then they figured out, oh my gosh, this show might be pretty big. So then they said, well, don't tell anybody, but we're going to sell another 20,000 tickets. So those sold right away. 100,000 tickets just in the matter of days literally sold off. Willie Nelson's road manager, just before the show opened up, he called about every single hotel in about a 60-mile radius of Champaign-Urbana and locked it up. I mean, it was bigger than any graduation weekend in Champaign-Urbana, or certainly any bigger than any home football weekend, which tends to pack hotels out there in the community. So, people were coming from everywhere. Again, more and more artists were clamoring to get into it, but couldn't do it. Some really funny stories have been told to me. They were looking, speaking of looking for flags, somebody decided the night before the show that they needed a great big American flag, and they hadn't thought of that. So there was a volunteer who was actually from here in Springfield, and he was kind of the go-to guy and kind of the guy that made things happen. So the next morning they show up, and the volunteer had miraculously come up with a great big American flag that went up on stage. Du Bois, again, a fine, outstanding Springfield native, heard on the news like a day or so later that a great big American flag was missing in Mahomet, Illinois, just outside of Champaign-Urbana, and they couldn't figure out where their big American flag went. But just kind of comical, funny stories like that transpired. The concert ended up being 14 hours long. Let me repeat, 14 hours long. It rained about the first 4 or 5 hours of the show. So imagine, you're going to a concert, you've got all these artists. Willie Nelson opens up with On the Road Again, I was going to wear my Willie Nelson headband, but I thought that'd be too out of place for Joe Alexander. But anyway, this just epic concert, live TV, if you will, live cable TV. And Willie gets up and he's like, we're here having a concert supporting America's farmers. Now, who could be against that? Including a U of I athletic director who wasn't really keen on the show because of the fears of what it might do. So I've been kind of hitting the road as Willie would appreciate. The actual 30th Farm Aid will be this Saturday in Chicago, in Northerly Island. Some of you may know it as Meigs Field. We used to be able to fly right onto the lakefront in Chicago there. But it's going to be at Northerly Island this weekend. The first Farm Aid raised about $1 million for agricultural issues and awareness. And I know we have a comptroller here with Sangamon County. What's adjusted for inflation? What's $1 million in 1985 dollars? But over the years, not that I necessarily prescribe to everything Willie Nelson believes in, including if there's any fine outstanding IRS agents here in the crowd. But that is essentially the story of Farm Aid that happened again. It was birthed here at the State Fair in 1985 and kind of has grown into this event, the first one being in Champaign, and it'll conclude in Chicago this weekend. So it's great to be with you. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Paul?
When you use the word conclude, that doesn't mean it's the last one, right?
No. Okay. No, go ahead.
Who's all at the Farm Aid in Chicago to celebrate the 30th anniversary?
So Willie Nelson continues to be integrally involved in the event. Okay, and Willie's in his 80s, I think? I mean, I was curious on how old Sammy Hagar is. Sammy's 67 years old. So some of these artists, been around for a while. Originally, it was a guy by the name of John Conley. He sang Rose-Colored Glasses. I think he sings today at the Grand Ole Opry. Not a real big name now, but Willie Nelson, Neil Young, and John Cougar Mellencamp. Johnny Cougar Mellencamp will be at the show. He's still integrally involved. Dave Matthews is more involved now 30 years later. I ran into a buddy of mine who was an undergrad at the U of I. I wasn't at the first Farm Aid, for full disclosure. I was 10 years old 30 years ago. My parents, for whatever reason, didn't take me to Farm Aid. I don't know what they were thinking, but a buddy of mine who was an undergrad at the time, he's like, oh yeah, we're in the six-pack. Some of you know what the six-pack is at the U of I, and there's John Cougar Mellencamp walking through with his Seymour, Indiana FFA jacket on, So he was there, a very young rock and roll guy who hadn't yet had his big album, a guy by the name of John Bon Jovi, played at the first Farm Aid.
So you expect still a big crowd then?
It was sold out. I think Northerly Island fits about 10,000 people.
Did the money trickle down well 30 years ago? Did it get what was intended?
Well, so again, I'm not fully up. I am not affiliated with Farm Aid in any way. Just again, just being candid with you, but I do like to talk about history, injecting kind of some recent local history with some pop culture. I'm not sure what all the money has gone to. It's got a little. I'm kind of a conservative guy in some ways, a lot of ways. It's kind of gone a little left of center for me. I do know there was an attorney or somebody who had gone back to law school at one point in time, who had gone broke farming, for lack of a better word. That farmer chose to go back to college, and he earned a law degree, and I think was involved in agriculture and consulting to farmers. So in that one case, that one story I've heard, I think they did that and raised awareness. I talked to one buddy of mine who farms, and you had media attention all over the place coming in for this, and the media, God bless them, from the East Coast, what's a combine? They didn't know what a combine was, so they had reporters out on combines leading up to the Farm Progress Show. This is what harvest is. This is a combine, just very basic rudimentary stuff. We harvest the crops and then we take it to an elevator and we sell it. That's how farmers make money. So that's, I think, a few of the things that have been done with money raised. Any other questions? Was anybody at the first Farm Aid? Paul, you were not there?
I was almost there.
You didn't go? You're probably busy studying for something that weekend, or?
My freshman year at college.
Okay. But again, it's great to be with you. I hope you enjoyed my conversation. It's great to be here in Springfield at the Kiwanis. Thank you very much.